Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the next hour. We really appreciate that. My name is Kim Parisi, and I am Director of Global Events here at SIG. I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar entitled Making Magic, How P2P Makes the Complex Appear Easy, presented by Zycus. Our webinars are meant to be interactive, so please submit your questions throughout the presentation by typing them in the Q&A box on your WebEx screen. We will do our best to answer all questions throughout and or at the conclusion of today's presentation. Now, before I proceed, I do want to go through a few housekeeping and calendar items with you. Now, many of you are familiar with SIG, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, I'd like to welcome you by quickly covering some of the resources we provide. Our global events program is ever evolving, but it simply wouldn't be possible without our attendees. We would love to have you attend one of our regional events or share them with your colleagues, so please check out the SIG website frequently for upcoming cities and current agendas. We do update that real time, so check back often. Now, you are participating in a webinar program right now. These take place weekly on Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and all are welcome to attend. You can visit our website for a complete listing of upcoming webinars and register today. SIG's peer-to-peer resource is an opportunity to ask top-of-mind questions for instant responses. These inquiries go out twice a week, and you do not have to be a SIG member to respond. And our SIG Resource Center is home to a plethora of tools, templates, white papers, and research documents that will help make your job easier each and every day. Now, SIG's Career Network features job postings for sourcing professionals and internship opportunities in all levels of employment. And last, but certainly not least, our Student Talent Outreach Program was designed to find tomorrow's supply chain professionals today, while students are still learning about the industry and developing their skills. Please reach out to me or any SIG team member directly if you have questions or would like more information about any of these programs. We are excited to announce that we have established these strategic partnerships for our SIG members to enjoy. We are thrilled to partner with GEP, Everest Group, and Siganova. Please visit the partnerships page on our website under the membership tab for more information. And we are also very happy to announce a couple of new partnership offerings coming soon, including People Ticker, a solution that will help you leverage market data to show savings and retention opportunities. And SIG has also teamed up with Spend Matters to offer discounted access to tailored solution map benchmarking-based tech selection services, such as Accelerator, Inside, and Spend Matter Pro. Now, our Global Executive Summits are semi-annual events with more than 350 decision-making delegates in attendance. The agenda is packed with keynote presentations, workshops, breakout sessions, and endless opportunities for networking. The agenda and event details for our Fall Summit in Carlsbad, California are available on our website, and registration is still open. That is quickly approaching October 14th through 16th, so please log on and check out those details and register quickly. Now, during our Fall Summit, we will also be holding the second annual Future of Sourcing Awards, recognizing organizations and individuals for innovation, leadership, and transformation in sourcing. And we invite you to be there and attend and witness the future in person. Here at SIG, we have mixed things up a bit and refreshed our regional event agendas. Please take a look at some of our upcoming events on the SIG website under the Networking Events tab. If you have colleagues in any of these cities, please invite them to attend as well. Now, SIG University offers training and development opportunities to people of all levels in their sourcing careers. We are still currently enrolling for the next semester of all three of our programs beginning September 30th. Only days away, so log in and register for that quickly. And now, the reason you have all gathered here today. Today's presentation is entitled Making Magic, How P2P Makes the Complex Appear Easy, presented by Zycus. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Richard Waugh, Vice President, Corporate Development at Zycus, As Vice President for Corporate Development, Richard leads strategic initiatives in the areas of new product introduction, market development, thought leadership, analyst relations, and strategic partner development programs. Richard has an extensive background in B2B e-commerce. He helped launch GE's Trade Process Network, the first online marketplace for sourcing and procurement. He was also co-founder of B2E Markets, one of the first software-as-a-service sourcing suite providers, and later covered the supply management market as an industry analyst for the Aberdeen Group. Richard, we are truly honored to have you join us here today, and we are all looking forward to everything that you have to share with us. So with that, I will hand off the mic and controls to you to kick it off. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks everyone for joining for the session today, Making Magic, How P2P Makes the Complex Appear Easy. And since we are making magic today, my first magic trick would be to advance to the correct slide. Okay. And I think I still need the control. Okay, there, I'm able to advance. So for my next trick, I want to give an overview of the agenda. So we're going to start off talking about Gartner's Magic Quadrant. They've just published the most recent version of the Procure-to-Pay Magic Quadrant in the last couple of months. So we'll talk about what that entails and drill into some of the specifics and really understand what are the drivers, what critical core capabilities are the ones that users value the most, and then really talk about the real-world complex use cases that are being transformed through P2P automation, the so what of P2P, the core value proposition behind it. And we'll finish up with sort of a look to what new magic tricks are being created through the auspices of AI, artificial intelligence, to drive that next level efficiency and process simplicity that everyone is yearning for when it comes to procure-to-pay. So let me tell you real briefly before I get into the core content here, just to set some context about Zycus. We're a provider not only of procure-to-pay, but in fact an integrated suite of source-to-pay modules. So in the strategic procurement or upstream tools like spend analytics, e-sourcing, contract and supplier management, as well as that operational phase or downstream procure-to-pay. And, we're really a pure play technology provider, an innovator with the technology across source-to-pay, inclusive of procure-to-pay, and, a global provider that's been recognized by a number of leading analyst firms, whether that's Spend Matters or Forrester, or we've been positioned as a leader in Forrester's contract lifecycle management and e-procurement waves, and also with Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Strategic Sourcing Suites, consistently recognized as a leader 4 consecutive times for that particular Magic Quadrant. But today we're going to talk about the Procure-to-Pay Magic Quadrant. And in this area, Zycus has debuted in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Procure-to-Pay as a relatively newer provider and innovator, I would say, in the space. Zycus is pleased to announce that we're now included in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Procure-to-Pay Suites. And that particular report cited a number of core strengths that enabled Zycus to be cited in that particular report. So good, strong core P2P capabilities, doing all the basics that customers require procure-to-pay, and doing it in a way that's easy to use, that drives adoption. And not just adoption for end users within the enterprise, but also adoption within the supply base, specifically citing a well-defined and in fact free supplier onboarding service, and continuing to develop that capability to stay on top of the market, working very closely with customer advisory board and being open to customers' product enhancement ideas. I want to talk a little bit about what it means, what it took for Zycus to be included in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Procure-to-Pay Suites. And anyone who's interested in the full report, by the way, can visit the Zycus website for one as a way to go and download the full report. But just to talk about what it takes to be considered, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And it really starts with having a significant amount of traction in the market. You know, more than 12 million in P2P revenue in 2018, better than 30 clients, each of which has more than 1 billion in revenue and which are using the full P2P solution. So both the purchase to order or e-procurement side as well as the invoice to pay or AP automation side of the house, so full P2P. And within that context, being able to demonstrate a number of core capabilities. So that means driving the requisition approval workflow process, generating POs, enabling the receipts. Once the POs and the invoices and the receipts are completed, enabling a 2- or 3-way match, as well as being able to pay on invoice without a PO, a number of capabilities here. And they're also looking for not just providers that have a significant market presence or market share, but which have also demonstrated an ability to serve the market globally. So better than 20% of the 2018 revenue had to come from outside of the provider's home region, if you will. So regions, if you're a provider in North America, such as Zycus, having significant revenue penetration in other regions such as Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, and Japan. So those were the criteria for inclusion. Next, I want to look at some of the key findings that came out of Gartner's P2P Magic Quadrant. So first of all, the market itself is significant in terms of the overall revenues. So the market value is sized at $3 billion in 2018, and it's forecast by Gartner to grow at an annual growth rate of about 10%, such that by the year 2023, they're expecting the market to reach $5 billion in revenue. So a significant market that's well established, and some pretty specific criteria mentioned by the reference customers that participated in the Gartner Magic Quadrant study for reasons to adopt P2P. So the value proposition that resonates most with P2P buyers is the number one position at 52% said they wanted to enable a guided buying process, really get the procurement professional out of the routine processing of requisitions, POs, and get the AP out of processing, routine invoice transactions. Let the automation do more of that sort of tactical transactional process. That was the most often cited reason, and I'll drill into each of these in a moment. But number two was looking at what the output of P2P automation would be in terms of the strategic value of insights to spending, particularly indirect spend, which tends to predominate in the P2P vein, where it's very difficult, it's very fragmented to get granular kind of spend visibility. That's one of the key drivers that P2P adopters were looking for, followed by 42% that said we need to get contract compliance savings. So using P2P as a way to channelize demand across the organization to steer users through a guided buying capability to the approved, preferred, contracted vendors to make sure you're always getting the contracted pricing and terms that the sourcing professionals work so hard to put in place in negotiating those agreements to remove that leakage, that maverick spending that erodes those savings. So pretty clearly delineated top three reasons for adopting P2P. As I mentioned, I'll go into some illustration of each of these points in a moment. But also listed in the Gartner report here are the top three factors in selecting a P2P provider. So part of the magic at work here is how do we really blend or marry these top two factors. I want functionality, that's number one, meaning I've got complex use cases that have to be supported, so the functionality has to be in-depth enough and robust enough to support that complexity, but at the same time, the second top cited factor is ease of use. I want it to be intuitive to end users to drive real adoption. So really creating that alchemy between the two, blending the two to support complexity at the same time being easy to use and intuitive. And of course, reason number three, we've got procurement professionals buying procurement solutions, so naturally price and value, of course, is always going to be a top factor. 50% of those said price was one of their top decision criteria. So I wanted to go into a little bit more depth then on if these are the top three reasons that people are adopting P2P, what does that really entail? What is guided buying? What's the value of spend insight? What's the value of driving greater compliance to negotiated agreements? So let's take those in order. Number one, the guided buying model. So to kind of walk through that, in the Zycus case, we're using artificial intelligence to guide the user through the requisitioning and ordering process to not only simplify and improve the user experience for end users, but to drive much higher levels of compliance. So it starts with that initial moment of truth when any user logs into a P2P platform and initiates a search. Can I find the product or service that I'm looking for? Because after all, if they don't, odds are they're going to be encouraged to make an end run around the system to do something that's non-compliant. So it has to be not only easy to use, but effective in that the users can quickly find what they need, place their orders, and get on about their business of doing their jobs, because after all, this is just a necessary evil to them to be able to get the products or services that they need to complete a project, for example. So it starts with that initial search. And the way AI informs that and drives the guided buying process is a user just puts in their natural language search term. AI then looks at those keywords and automatically suggests the proper category for their search. The user doesn't need to know what their taxonomy is, what the nomenclature is for the item that they're searching for. AI knows that, and by presenting them only with approved items from contracted vendors within those categories, you're removing any extraneous search results that could really bog down the user or sidetrack them, or even worse, lead them to buying something that you don't intend for them to buy, a non-compliant purchase. So it starts at that moment of truth, the initial search, and AI is helping the user to quickly find, based on my search term, what is the category, and more importantly, who are the approved contracted vendors that I should select from. And in some cases, that means items that are on a catalog, but for many purchases in the indirect space, they involve non-catalogable items, often services, for example. So the way guided buying works in that case is instead of presenting the user with sort of a blank slate, a purely free text form, based on the categorization that's been applied by AI, the user is going to be prompted with a category-specific term, and therefore prompted to provide the relevant specifications and attributes about that, let's say, service that they need to requisition, such that when it goes through the approval workflow and gets to someone in procurement, you're removing some of that guesswork and the back and forth discussion that often goes on for procurement to understand exactly what the requisition or requirements are, what their needs are. And the other factor that's involved in guided buying is not just helping the user find the product or service that they need, but speeds them through the checkout process to improve their overall user experience, to make it more efficient and faster. So that means because organizations may have different approval workflow processes depending on the category of product or service that's being added to the shopping cart, using AI to derive the proper categorization means that the P2P platform can automatically invoke the appropriate category-specific approval workflow. So I, as a user, don't need to guess about what approval path my requisition needs to follow, who I need to send this to. That's automatically invoked for them, and in fact, they get a graphical view of what that approval path is going to be and can keep tabs on the status of their requisition as it goes through. Moreover, by assigning the proper categorization using AI, the system can then derive, in fact, map from the category code to the proper GL code. So as a user, I'm not having to guess about the 15-digit account string that has to be entered. That's all defaulted on behalf of me as a requisitioner, and based on my user profile, I don't have to input information about ship to, bill to, and anything else. I'm just able to click I'm done and get on about my business as intended. So that's really the way that guided buying can work most efficiently, by leveraging artificial intelligence in that process. So reason number one was guided buying. Reason number two was to gain valuable spend insights to what's actually being purchased through the P2P process. So here it's interesting to look at some data from the Hackett Group that contrast the level of spend visibility for the top performing organizations versus the average organization or the peer group overall. And it's a wide disparity. So top performers have virtually all of their transactions categorized down to a line item level, 99% line item spend visibility versus just 38% for the peer group overall. So the statement here is that organizations that capture line item description detail during the P2P process can obviously enable better spend analytics and therefore drive greater sourcing savings in the process. So whereas most organizations can probably identify spending at an aggregate supplier level or maybe a high-level commodity like hardware, the ability to get down to a line item level of granular visibility. So for instance, to know not only that I made a purchase from Dell Computers, but that it's a notebook computer, not just some general catch-all category like hardware, computer hardware, and that's going to give me the leverage when I go to market in a sourcing process to really understand exactly how much I'm buying and what quantities when it comes to a specific line item like notebook computers. So lots of opportunity in terms of gaining better spend visibility through P2P automation. And the third top reason mentioned was to drive contract compliance savings. So in this case, McKinsey & Company's put together a look at what the ROI potential is for automating source-to-pay or procure-to-pay processes. And on average, your results may vary depending on what your current baseline is, but McKinsey's data suggests that the opportunity is about 3.5% of spend. So this example speaks specifically to indirect spending, 3.5%. So for most organizations, that's going to be a very substantial dollar amount of potential savings. And it's driven primarily by the opportunity in gaining better compliance to contracts. So 2% of the 3.5%, 2 points of the 3.5 points, is specifically from lack of compliance. So getting more compliance is going to drive a significant share of the overall ROI. And in fact, if you added the 0.5 point for control, which really speaks to compliance as well, probably about 2.5% of the 3.5% is really getting more compliance to your existing negotiated vendor contracts and agreements, and then an additional point or so of savings through greater efficiencies and actually reducing the cost of the transactions themselves. So those are the top three reasons for P2P. I want to talk then a little bit more specifically about the attributes that Gartner cited including Zycus amongst the Magic Quadrant for P2P in this instance. And specifically, they talked about ease of use and UI. So reference customers rated their user experience well above average. They also said that there was an openness to collaboration with them in terms of their product enhancement request and taking that customer feedback into the product roadmap process. And thirdly, the supplier onboarding being a critical value driver, and that Zycus specifically has a very well-defined service with well above average scores from reference customers. So again, I wanted to provide a few more specifics and examples about what those three characteristics really mean: ease of use and UI, the active customer advisory board or customer feedback process, and what is supplier onboarding, what is the value of that. So first I'll take a use case here from our customer base, and this is a customer in the hospitality industry. So every customer has a goal to drive maximum user adoption and looks at, ensuring ease of use and user adoption as a key driver in their initiative, a key success factor. And it's a challenge for every organization, but I would postulate that if you're a hotelier and someone in the hospitality industry, as this customer is, your challenges are exacerbated by the fact that not only are these non-procurement users, but they're not really, corporate types whom you might assume to have a certain level of proficiency or familiarity with technology. In this case, you're looking at on the property users that would include people at the front desk, the chefs in the kitchen, housekeeping, that need to have the most intuitive user experience to ensure that they can easily adopt these tools. And here we've got just sort of a vignette. In this case, they've branded their instance as SHOP, Secure Hotel Online Purchasing. And someone at the front desk is informed we need to replace our first aid kit. I wonder if I can find it on SHOP. And not to leave you hanging, here the user, the front desk staff is able to quickly find there are two different options available for a first aid kit from approved contracted vendors, and they can very quickly compare those products and make a compliant purchase in the most efficient manner possible. The second attribute mentioned was having an active customer advisory board, incorporating customer feedback. So one of the tools that Gartner provides is actually a method for customers, not just Zycus customers. This example happens to be from Zycus, but for customers to provide their sort of ratings and reviews, if you will, similar to a consumer model, about their experience with that provider. So just one example included here speaks specifically to that customer's experience that said, we felt like we were a collaborator and a partner, that customer feedback is key to enhancing the P2P product. So this is a good resource to go and check out any of the providers and see what their customers are saying in terms of a peer review about that experience. Now, the third item mentioned was supplier onboarding. So just to sort of reinforce the importance of an efficient, effective supplier onboarding service, look at some of the benchmarks that Hackett Group has put together. And it's interesting, first of all, that there's such a significant difference between top performers and the peer group overall in terms of the rationalization and consolidation of their supply bases. So top performers have already significantly consolidated their suppliers as compared to the peer group overall. So fewer than 7,000 suppliers per billion of spend, whereas the peer group has nearly 18,000 per billion. Moreover, within that supply base, a much larger percentage are active suppliers. So they have fewer suppliers where they haven't had orders for more than a year, or that have duplicates. They've cleaned up the vendor master file significantly, so 74% are active. And when it comes to enabling suppliers, specifically enabling suppliers for electronic invoicing. The good news is that the further that you've consolidated the supply base to begin with, it's going to make it that much easier to onboard the vast majority of suppliers for e-invoicing by concentrating and prioritizing those that are generating 80% of the volume. So usually we talk about the 80-20 rule, but in this case it's even more concentrated than that, that top performing organizations are generating 80% of all invoices from just 4% of active suppliers. So that enables them to prioritize in the initial onboarding for P2P and specifically for electronic invoicing, that small subset of the supply base that's generating the vast majority of the volume of invoices. And one of the reasons that an effective onboarding service is so important is we look at some of the cost benchmarks that Hackett's provided here. For instance, if you were doing this yourself, on average it's going to cost about $925 per supplier to get them onboarded and enabled for e-invoicing. And that's going to take time too. So an elapsed time of about 16 days, applied time of a little better than 2 days of applied effort. So if the provider, the P2P provider, is providing that efficiently and effectively, and in fact as a free service, there's a real dollar value that can be ascribed to that as compared to having to deploy your own resources to complete the onboarding effort of suppliers. So just to look at some of those characteristics, I then wanted to talk about, while we're on benchmarks, Zycus has just recently published our own Procure-to-Pay benchmark report, again available for download at our website, but it surveyed a very statistically valid sample of participants, so more than 600 respondents from over 300 organizations participated in this particular study, and a pretty good cross-section globally, just under 50% from North America and the rest from other regions of the world. So, a very representative cross-section of the market, and there's lots of detailed benchmarks in there, but I just wanted to highlight some of the efficiency benchmarks that came out of our study, which once again, similar to some of the ones I mentioned from Hackett, show a wide gap between what the top performers, the digital leaders are achieving versus the average performer overall. So if we look at, POs and invoices, which are really the driver of the P2P efficiency game, how do I take friction out of those transaction processes? In general, you're looking at top performers that are processing POs and invoices more than 50% faster than the average at about half the cost. Moreover, they've really digitized the vast majority of their transactions. So most are non-touch, zero-touch orders, 71% for top performers. And those top performers are claiming 100% digitization of invoices. Sometimes I think there's some dispute over the definition, and then just to set the record straight, I'll say that if you get a PDF invoice as an attachment to an email, that's not truly a digital invoice. That has to be opened by someone and viewed and scanned or key punched in. So that may be a bit inflated, but still the conclusion remains valid that there's a vast disparity between what top performers are achieving, those that have really digitized this entire procure-to-pay process to get much more efficiency, which of course implies that they're now able to reallocate many more of those resources to much higher value strategic activities than processing routine POs and invoices, as an example. But again, would encourage everyone to go to our website and download the full benchmark study to get much greater insights into what the opportunity is in P2P automation, and perhaps to compare your baseline against some of these broader benchmark data. So I wanted to talk then about complexity. what makes P2P complex? And specifically, we often talk about how do we emulate the B2C, the consumer shopping experience that we're all familiar with at Amazon, for example. How do we emulate that in a B2B shopping environment? And I think we've come a long way, but the simple answer is there are a number of complexities that exist in B2B that simply don't exist in the consumer world. So, when my wife goes online shopping or if I do it for that matter, there aren't any business rules. There's no approvals. I can guarantee you that. And there's no back-end integration to an ERP system or charts of accounts. But all of these things exist in a B2B environment. It has to follow a prescribed process in terms of the approval workflow based on a delegation of authority. We got various business rules that may be very specific to individual categories, for example. There is the reality and complexity of then having to integrate the P2P process in those transactions ultimately that need to get posted in the general ledger in the ERP system and populate various charts of accounts to satisfy the accounting requirements. So the reality is there's a complexity that exists in business to business that simply isn't there in business to consumer. And even within a single enterprise, there may be different business rules, different workflows, different ERPs, or even different charts of accounts at different levels. So for a particular business unit or geography, the configurability of the system has to deal with those inherent complexities very effectively. And just to cite one example here that I think is sort of the poster child for complexity is, again, in the hotel industry, where many of the users, the participants, are even not part of the enterprise, so to speak. They're franchisee properties. So obviously an independent entity such as that is going to have a completely different set of business rules and approval workflows and obviously a different back-end accounting system. And in this case, the solution has the configurability to enable within a single instance of a multi-tenant SaaS, or cloud infrastructure, the ability for each of those entities down to a property level to apply their own specific business rules and configuration. So that's kind of the complexity we're dealing with, and one of the keys is ensuring that a solution can support that complexity and, in fact, mask it to the end user. The end user shouldn't have to worry about approval workflow and which back-end ERP this is being integrated to, what's the chart of accounts. They just need to be able to place their orders and do it in a compliant fashion. So just to give you a little bit more visibility into what we found is, a number of different chart of account sort of hierarchies and structures that exist. It may vary from industry to industry. So the example on the left here of a manufacturing customer and the various segments in their chart of accounts, a more complex example for a banking and financial services customer. And the key is having a flexible type of a model in terms of the P2P application to support interfacing to those different charts of accounts and being able to populate each of those segments in a very effective way. And a couple of examples here. And in one case, it was solving a customer issue where in their prior P2P solution, getting validation of the posting of the chart of accounts could take days. So getting that to near real time, only seconds, is key to ensuring an effective and efficient P2P process, because after all, these are real transactions. So delays can mean missing a customer date or a project milestone and those kinds of things. So speed and efficiency being the key in managing that level of complexity. Workflows themselves can be extremely complex. So here's Hackett's model that looks at the fact that there is no single monolithic workflow that supports every type of transaction process. So they've got these swim lanes listed here. And, at the top is the traditional three-way match, which is used by most often used not only by the top performers, but the peer group as well, which it provides the maximum level of control. But I think the argument here from Hackett is it's not always the most efficient, or that the additional controls may not be warranted in some cases based on the relatively low risk for low dollar value transactions, for example. So when they talk about optimal channels or workflows, they would remove the top swim lane three-way match, but of course the bottom one as well, which is invoice only. So a no PO invoice, which is kind of no man's land. That's a lack of control on the front end of the purchasing process that everyone wants to avoid. But the ones in the middle, they're saying under the right conditions, these would be the most efficient methods of processing a transaction. So assumed receipt in some cases where I don't need to just match the PO to the invoice, especially for relatively low dollar value transactions. Let's say office supplies where completing a receiving report isn't warranted given the level of potential exposure, or evaluated receipt settlements where I don't need the invoice at all, just match the receipt to the PO. Perhaps for goods that are replenished on a frequent basis with well-established supply relationships, or in some cases a recurring invoice. No POs issued, just paying against invoice against contract, or P card, or T&E type processing. But overall, they say top performers are able to process 42% of line items to these optimal channels, the most efficient process. But of course, they're balancing those against the level of risk and exposure, and often utilizing the three-way match to provide that level of control where warranted. But in any case, implementing multiple different buy pay processes or workflows depending on the category of product or service down to a line item level within a shopping cart means again, your P2P system has to have an easy to use, easy to implement approval workflow to support that level of complexity. And just to provide some examples here, within a multi-item, multi-vendor shopping cart, many of our customers are utilizing line-level approval, so being able to fork out those requisitions at a line level based on item-specific category approval rules. So we're actually running multiple approval workflows within a shopping cart specific to individual lines, and being able to rejoin those to generate the orders. And this is producing significant efficiencies and making sure that as dynamic as these business rules and approval workflows are, that it's easy to make changes too. So a graphical drag and drop way of implementing the approval workflow says that you're not beholden to either the solution provider or internal IT to make those changes. It's something that a non-technical user can implement very easily. So another layer of complexity is ERP integrations. So I think in some of the early days of P2P deployments, the view was that P2P can handle the entire requisition, PO, and invoice workflow process, and then simply post an okay to pay invoice back to ERP. And that still is often the case. But one of the things that we found increasingly is that customers want the flexibility to mix and match, pick and choose between the ERP and the P2P system. So they may have certain receiving routines or requisition approval routines set up in ERP that they don't want to have to shelve, but they want interoperability between the P2P system. So at each stage, the ability to go back and forth. And one great example is direct materials. The replenishment for direct materials will logically remain in the ERP system based on MRP and inventory replenishment, but then using the P2P tools and the supplier collaboration that's included there to actually deliver an electronic PO for direct materials to the supplier to then get back an invoice and match it against the receipt. So selectively being able to pick and choose and manage that integration in real time or near real time is really the level of flexibility that customers are looking for when it comes to sort of managing the complexity of back-end ERP integration. So the other aspect of making magic here is actually integrating P2P with the overall S2P process. So things like utilizing spend visibility to take invoice data in real time or near real time as transactions are processed in P2P and provide that visibility from a spend analytics standpoint instead of waiting for a normally scheduled, let's say, monthly or quarterly refresh process. It's linking Procure-to-Pay to sourcing in some cases. So a requisitioner has a need for a product or service that's not on catalog or not on contract. It needs to be sourced. So being able to take that requisition, quickly flip it into an RFQ, negotiate the price and update the shopping cart and process the order. It's about tightly integrating contracts to P2P. Because so many of the purchases are non-catalog, having the contract itself visible at the point of requisition, what we call contract lock, is a way to ensure the maximum compliance and efficiency in the P2P process. So just a few examples here of integrating Procure-to-Pay in the broader source-to-pay construct. Quick case study for you, if you will. This is from Curtiss-Wright, a manufacturing industry customer that had all of those complexities that I mentioned before. In fact, maybe the leader in the clubhouse in terms of ERP complexity with more than 40 plus instances of various ERPs operating. So being able to bring that together in one common platform for managing Procure-to-Pay, and in this case, in fact, source-to-pay process, has generated some pretty dramatic results in terms of user adoption across 7 different business units, onboarding a critical mass of suppliers, enabling a significant number, better than 50 catalogs enabled, and about 90% adoption of e-invoicing, which overall has led to significantly greater compliance or reduced contract leakage and exceeding the ROI targets that were set up for the project. So the last area that I wanted to cover today is what are the new magic tricks that are coming with AI to make new magic when it comes to Procure-to-Pay. And I'll mention that AI has been sort of embedded in the DNA, certainly for Zycus from the inception of the company, and in very much the mode of what let's call augmented procurement. So using AI to classify spend transactions more accurately and give guidance to sourcing professionals to what opportunities they should focus on from a sourcing standpoint, or using AI to guide requisitioners through the Procure-to-Pay process, make suggestions, provide those guardrails through the process. But what's new and what's coming here is for certain tasks across source-to-pay and Procure-to-Pay in particular, there's an opportunity with AI and RPA, robotic process automation, to use bots in the vein of autonomous procurement, so no human intervention required. So I wanted to drill into that a little bit more specifically. And first of all, to make the case for bots is the fact that procurement is still too tactical. So looking at some Hackett Group data here, for example, it compares world-class performers to the peer group overall. And first of all, it's pretty revealing that world-class performers are already producing superior results with fewer FTEs. So they're already leaner and meaner, owing largely to the level of digitization that they've already accomplished. But if we look at all the tasks across the process and sort of draw a line down the center, those to the left are the more tactical, processing receipts or processing POs, for example. And even top performing organizations, if you added up the FTEs, have more than 50% to the left of the line. So still too tactical, even if you're a world-class performer. And that mix is even more exaggerated for the peer group overall, where about 2/3 of FTEs are allocated to those more tactical transactional tasks. So whether you're already world-class or non-world-class, an average performer, there's lots of room for automation as you look across the process. And just to sort of embellish that point a little bit more here, McKinsey did a study looking at all of the various tasks across source to pay. And they found that, in fact, 56% of the tasks that starts with the source to contract but goes through procure to invoice and invoice to pay, that 56% of those could mostly or be fully automated using artificial intelligence. Now, that's good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it. I do think that really is good news in that while many of the tasks being performed today could be automated, the opportunity is to free up time for people to be much more strategic than they are currently. And certainly the areas that are most ripe for improvement, as you'd expect, are in the order placement and invoice processing and payment areas, the most transactional activities where 88% of order placements could be automated, as much as 93% of payment processing. But even in some of the more strategic areas like vendor selection and negotiation, nearly half of the current tasks could be mostly or fully automatable using AI tools. So let's take a look at what some of those tools are and sort of what is the level of adoption that exists. So earlier this year, Zycus collaborated with ISM to do a study, sort of what is the state of AI and RPA adoption. And we're pretty surprised to find that despite all of the hype, if you will, or all the talk about AI and RPA, relatively few have implemented. Just 22% said they were currently using the technology, and most of those for less than a year. It is more prevalent with manufacturers currently than non-manufacturers. And I think the objectives are fairly conservative. It's about efficiency and productivity, not headcount reduction. And they're not necessarily looking for a near-term ROI, although I would postulate that inherently there's a belief that the ROI will come. And they're going to start with those more transactional data management kind of activities, but in the future expect to utilize selectively AI and RPA in more strategic procurement activity roles as well. So how does that work? Here's a recent webinar that Gartner analysts did, and they talked about what Zycus is doing in the space in terms of configuring workflows for microprocesses. So breaking it down into discrete activities, botlets, if you will, that can be assembled to really create a customized workflow. And this really sort of closes one of the gaps, one of the challenges that has existed with any cloud-based solution where yes, they're highly configurable, but because it's a multi-tenant SaaS environment, you really haven't been able to do much in a custom way. But by deploying bots, you can create these customized workflows that address the unique needs of each customer. And as Gartner goes on to say, that means you can deliver curated change management and also use machine learning to sort of predict or identify where a process or an iterative change needs to be delivered. So I want to conclude then with an opportunity to meet the bots, get a sort of a glimpse to what some of those bots can potentially do for organizations to free them up from those most tactical transactional processes, make them more productive and efficient. And there are a variety of bots listed here. I'll just give you a quick glimpse to a few of those. So here's a bot to automate the buyer's desk activities. So buyers getting in the middle of routine requisition transactions don't add significant value. So if you could configure a bot to adjudicate requisitions by applying various business rules to determine which requisitions to automatically convert to a PO, so to make those a touchless orders, or if they fail that test and particular business rules, to return that requisition to the user. And in some cases, actually using bots for very low dollar value items where sourcing is required to go get those 3 bids in a buy, where a buyer's not going to add significant value. Let the bot do that that sort of tactical sourcing on your behalf. The next one is a bot for invoice header and line item extraction. So even those AP departments that aren't still receiving paper invoices per se, many of them are getting email attachments that might as well be paper because they have to be opened and key punched in or scanned in. Here the bot can do the work to go and fetch that attachment from an email inbox and actually extract information both at the header and line level information. And because the bots are applying machine learning, they initially would apply a confidence score to how accurately they've extracted that information. But the more data that they see, that confidence score goes up. And in some cases, the ability to train the bot by the user correcting an inaccuracy means that going forward, every time that bot sees that particular invoice, that template from the supplier, it will make the correct application consistently 100% of the time. So it's a machine learning capability that has great potential dividends in the AP transaction processing. And then a virtual Punchout catalog bot, another example. Instead of users having to search and navigate different vendor Punchout websites one at a time, the bots can do that behind the scenes, aggregate the search results, and actually curate a local catalog of vendor Punchout items to enable that kind of comparison shopping that you experience with hosted catalogs. And finally, a contract metadata extraction bot. So a particular use case here would be you're bringing in third-party or legacy agreements. Instead of sifting through the 50-page Word document to find the key metadata fields, the bots can pour through the documents, extract them, and therefore format the agreements in your preferred template, all the while also highlighting clauses that present particular risks and suggesting alternatives. So with the advent of bots, the opportunity here is to leverage off-the-shelf technology, but also be able to customize it, make it your own, deploy it first in a practice or a test mode, and then schedule or launch those bots in production and see the efficiency gains that result. And finally, I just wanted to make mention that Zycus has upcoming our annual conference called Horizon, scheduled for the 3rd through the 5th of November in Charleston, South Carolina. And there's a promo code here for discount passes for anyone who might be interested in attending this best practices conference, a list of notable speakers, including both practitioners and leading industry analysts and experts. And a full agenda is available for you. So, Kim, I know I've covered a lot of ground in an hour, and I want to just turn it back to you for final closing comments.
Absolutely, Richard. Thank you so much. I don't know about everybody else, but that hour sure flew by for me. I was really, really interested. So cannot thank you enough for presenting everything that you did and sharing all of that information with us today. And folks, this does conclude today's webinar. Once again, thank you to Richard for sharing all of your insights with us. And we really look forward to connecting with you soon, like maybe at the SIG Summit coming up in just a few weeks. And to let everybody know, Zycus will be presenting at the summit Wednesday, October 15th. It's actually session number 17 from 9:30 to 10:20. And the session is entitled The Digital Dividend, Realizing Sustainable Source-to-Pay Transformation Benefits, co-presenting with CDK Global, and of course Zycus. So Please pop in for that session as well for all of those of you who will be at the summit. And we are currently pushing out a PDF copy of the slides. So please check the link on your WebEx screen to download it straight to your desktop. Also keep an eye out for the follow-up email you will be receiving tomorrow, which includes a link to the recording of the session today. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and a very special thank you to Richard and Zycus in general. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.